Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have another one of our phenomenal guests. We have Shanay Watson Whittaker. She is our political organizer and expert and strategist. She tells us everything that we need to know, breaks down topics for us very well. And so today we're going to start off the new year by having a political update and outlook for 2022. Good evening, Shanay, and Happy New Year to you. How are you?
Thank you so much. Happy New Year to you, Kim. I'm doing great, and I thank God that we made it another year.
Amen, amen, amen. So let's get right to it. So it is 2022. Midterms are coming. So, But before we get to the talk about midterms, let's talk about the Voting Rights Act. Let's talk about January 6th. And actually, I want to start with January 6th because we just passed the year mark a week ago. And we are still investigating. Yes. We are still trying to subpoena people to figure out who knew what. And people are throwing around all these incendiary statements and comments. And I'm thinking, okay, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox all show the same footage.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard in the year, it's too much violence. It's Black Lives Matter. I'm like, okay, yes, it was an integrated, and I'm going to say that it was an integrated domestic terrorist act where people showed up to our capital, not just the capital of a state, not just the capital of a city, but the capital of the United States, the same capital that we make movies about. Olympus Has Fallen. And and I don't know if you like action movies, Shanay. I do. I watched it and I'm like, oh, that's sort of scary. But this is a good movie. I like it. But then when it happens in real life, we're like, oh, wait, these people didn't necessarily crash the White House, but they crashed Congress. And when you look at it, there were people outside that erected a gallows. This wasn't something where somebody was doing a reenactment at an evil event where we were talking about some foreign king who beheaded people or hung people. This is in our nation's capital. We saw people pour through the doors, break through doors. We saw Capitol Police. We saw congressional security pull their guns out to fire at people to keep them back. And yes, lives were lost on both sides. We saw people, and Shanay, you and I have both, and you still do, and I have both worked for political leaders. And when you work for an elected official, there are certain things that staffers can do. As a staffer, I can walk into the particular person that I work for. I can walk into their office. Why? Because I have a badge. I have permission to be there. I can be in the innermost sanctum. And depending on what your level is, in terms of if you are a high-ranking staffer or a low level, can also determine your access to that person. So let's be very clear on that. These people, these domestic terrorists, went into the inner sanctum of people's offices. Not only did they put their feet up on desks, and I'm not just saying it like, oh, it was a travesty because they put their foot up on a desk, but you took a picture of it and smiled and posted it on social media. You had staffers who were running, who were barricading doors, praying that no one was going to hurt them. We had our elected leaders who had to be sequestered in secret places to keep them out of harm's way. Our vice president at the time, Mike Pence, he and his family had to be escorted out. I don't know what people saw. I don't understand this changing and this revisiting of history where we are trying to spin it. To me, there's nothing to spin. I understand what's happening, But I just want you, from a political organizer and strategist, break down what we have seen and what this says about American democracy. Because the one thing that I keep telling people, we're in trouble. And no one seems to really understand that.
Well, what we're seeing is the politicization of the event. Excuse me, my tongue is today. And on one side, you have, the Congress people who actually experienced it, from personal conversations that I've had with Congress people who share my point of view. They're traumatized by it still. They feel like, they're not, that what happened was not being taken seriously. It's to the point that some Congress people, they have, discussions amongst themselves, just as like a therapeutic sessions amongst themselves to talk about the trauma that they faced that day. And then you have the other side, they're like engaging in some sort of revisionist history, calling them, patriots, and calling them they're LARPers, they're pretending to be protesters, and they were just visitors. Meanwhile, people died on both sides. Ashley Babbitt died, and then the police officer died as well. And then afterwards, there were a number of officers who've either been traumatized or committed suicide. Mm-hmm. So when you see the trivialization of what happened that day on one side, just for their quest for absolute power, it's damaging. And then, you hear pundits, they try to both sides the issue. There's no such thing as both sides. Right is right and wrong is wrong, as my Nana would say. Mm-hmm. What these people did was they had intentions to do harm to Congress people they did not agree with. They did not agree with the election turnout, so they decided to riot and to react. And what we're learning more and more is that it was much more detailed and planned out. It wasn't just something that was sudden. And I'm the type that likes to be cautious when it comes to, criminal prosecution. So I would implore people to be patient with the process. I know that sometimes it's mind-boggling that, you can catch somebody off the street for robbing somebody, or, you have cameras everywhere. So you can get caught speeding, and yet this investigation is still happening. I think what we're seeing is the investigators be deliberate about this, because they understand the politics behind this. And they understand that no matter what evidence is presented, that there's going to be a segment of society that will not believe it, will not accept it. They believe that the previous president is still the president of the United States, and they're not going to let go of it. It's like 33 to 37% of the country that won't let go, regardless of what you do. So, I get why it's taking so long. I wish, like other people, that it would move faster, but it's intentional. But it's just disheartening to see people make light of the situation and play the both sidesism games, like both sides have equal arguments, and it's not so.
Absolutely. What's also distressing, and I forgot to bring this up earlier, we've also learned that there were states that created fake documents. I was trying to think of the word, excuse me. Created fake documents to decertify the election. And again, alarm bells are going off for me. And as someone who has been politically active the majority of my life, and I'm looking at people like, do you not see what's happening? Don't you understand? What would you say in terms of people who see this, who aren't quite sure and think, oh, the country is just in a weird place because we're so polarized. I don't really think it's as bad as what you think it is. Give us some time away from President Trump and all the different things that have surrounded him and all the circumstances, and everything's going to be okay. What would you say to someone based on your expertise about that?
I always look back to history. Excuse my dog in the background. She's the little loud one. When it comes to the fake electors, I know here in Michigan, there was a list. The Michigan GOP provided a list of fake electors to basically hand over the election to the former president. And our attorney general right now is investigating that matter. So it's not just this state, there are other states as well. And it just goes to show you that people will do the absolute most, the worst. They'll commit heinous crimes just to keep themselves in power. Power is that addictive to these people, and they'll do anything they can to either grab it or to keep it. You know, even including voting rights itself. You know, a few years ago in 2006, the Senate overwhelmingly passed the Voting Rights Act, and all of a sudden today, because of the outcome of the last election, you know, it's gone, has expired. But these people they're absolute. You look at historically, whenever there is a progressive victory in some sort of manner, there's always a white backlash. January 6th is one aspect of that. What happened in Virginia in the last election cycle is another example of that as well. So, and then now, you know, voting rights is being gutted. The Civil Rights Division in Virginia is being gutted by the current governor and the current lieutenant governor. So that's what happens in our history, in this country's history. As a Black person, I'm not surprised by it. Maybe other folks are, but if you really pay attention to what's going on, there's a history behind the action versus reaction of white reactionaries, white nationalists, and conservative folks on the right.
And I think you're absolutely correct. We know this, unfortunately, and there have been a few articles that have come out where they have talked about how Black people, although we are the minority in this country, and I believe in population-wise, according to census records, we're behind the Hispanic Latino population. We are still the ones that everyone turns to when you want to give an enemy or put a face to crime, put a face to issues around social issues such as welfare. When we talk about welfare queens, it's still the Black community that is used and ostracized for that. Although we know that statistic-wise, that it is non-people of color who are the biggest beneficiaries of welfare in this country. But I want to switch gears because you brought it up, the Voting Rights Act, which to me, with all the states passing, not all the states, but many states, passing laws to make it much more difficult. You know, we're talking about Texas, we're looking at Georgia, you said Virginia. There are other places, and even Michigan is making it more difficult for you to have to actually either vote in person or vote by absentee. And, you know, people will say, well, we want to make sure that everyone is honest. But the reality is the statistics bear out that typically when people say that there's a problem, that people are being fraudulent, it's usually not. It's a very small percentage. I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen at all, but it's typically a small percentage. It isn't this wild number that people have inflated. Where do you see the Voting Rights Act headed? I know that right now in the Senate, it's sort of dead. Joe Manchin, who is a Democrat, and Karen Sinema, who's a Democrat, were both sent a letter by Nick Saban, Jerry West, and other key, influential, prominent sports people, figures, in a letter advocating and encouraging them to support this. Where do you see this going?
On the Senate side, I think that it's essentially dead for now, with both Kristen Sinema, the Arizona senator, and Joe Manchin, the West Virginia senator, being against the filibuster. And they know the racist history of the filibuster. They know that it's been used as a weapon by segregationists, white nationalists, white supremacists, to limit the goal of racial equality in America. I can't respond without saying, if you support this filibuster, understanding the intent of the filibuster, it's nowhere in the Constitution, and you're using it to stop voting rights and voting access, then you are nothing more than a white supremacist.
Yes.
Because you can pass the filibuster, you can go push through the filibuster and go past the filibuster for Supreme Court appointees, but you can't do that for Voting Rights Act. You can do that for the debt ceiling, but you can't do that for Voting Rights Act. So what I've seen so far and what's been demonstrated by both Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin is a total disregard for people of color. It's a total disregard for minority voices in America. They know. Joe Manchin is he's aged, he's seasoned. He knows the history, he's seen it, he's lived through it. He knows that it disproportionately impacts people of color. He knows that, but he knows his constituents too. They overwhelmingly vote Republican. Outside of him, everybody else in the West Virginia statewide office, they're all Republicans. So he's going to bow to his constituency and hide behind supporting the filibuster by saying it's a tradition, knowing that tradition is a racist tradition, and knowing that it's not in the Congress. And Senator Sinema, when she first came into politics, she was a Green Party candidate, and she was this darling of the left. And as she's advanced in her political career, she's switched sides. And at one point she championed the Voting Rights Act, and all of a sudden now she's for the filibuster. She reminds me of white women who like equality, but not for everybody. If it's nice to be equal, but not that equal.
Right.
So I'm very disappointed in both Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, and the grandstanding and the power grab that they have right now. Right now, they're basically telling Black people, you don't count, you don't matter, your voice doesn't matter, and we want to stay in power. Mm-hmm. So I can't see anything more than just being a white supremacist and supporting white supremacy and hiding behind the filibuster because you are afraid of your constituents and your donors.
And speaking of which, I had a conversation with someone years and years ago, and we talked about the challenges of community organizing. And you know this very well, Shanay. When you get down to the grassroots level and you're talking to people about what their issues, and there are so many similarities between Appalachia and urban areas. And people don't understand that the people in Appalachia and people in the big cities, Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, who are all experiencing population loss. You're experiencing technology and business loss because companies are moving other places. You want to have the same access to education. You want to have the same access to clean water. You want to have access to being able to live a good life, meaning buy a home, have a job, be able to provide for your family, have safety, have good roads, so that in Michigan, we joke about how bad our roads are. And it became a point of political conversation in our last gubernatorial race, where they kept talking about, I'm going to fix the roads. And I was like, are we really having this conversation? I understand why we have this conversation. But my thought was, we have so many other things that we need to be concerned about. But can you talk a little bit about, for those that are listening that live in Appalachia and those that live in urban areas, what are some commonalities and some things that we can focus on to encourage groups to come together to increase their power and their pull, so that when we have to force candidates, because that's at the end of the day, and you said it right, when we talk about Congressman Manchin, he is bowing to his constituents. However, not all of his constituents feel that way, and we know that. But the reality is, And I always like to say it, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so if they are the loudest, the biggest, the baddest, the ones that raise the most money, guess what? That's who he's going to listen to. How would you advise community organizers, though, who are looking to change things, how to have that conversation?
Well, I can say statistically, West Virginia is in the bottom of our 50 states when it comes to income, when it comes to health, when it comes to uh, mental health. In fact, West Virginia is the most depressed state in the United States. And what I think that's been avoided is talk about poverty and access to resources. You know, we know West Virginia as a coal state, a manufacturing state, and yet, you know, there hasn't been much investment in the state. You know, regardless of the leadership, Republican or Democrat, you know, there are people who are trying to organize folks out there, but that feeling of neglect and despair, that can be shared in both urban and rural America. You know, a lot of the attention is focused on suburban moms, you know, instead of folks that are in the cities where a majority of Americans live, and in Appalachia and rural America, where there's issues of access to broadband, where there are hospital closures, where good doctors, good healthcare providers are not available because they happen to go where, you know, where the money is. You know, when you have a poor state like West Virginia, very few people can live, you know, within their means there. You know, if you're a doctor and you have the opportunity to make money elsewhere, you know, you're going to look at that other option. I'm not saying everyone would, because there are doctors in West Virginia, but Appalachia is a different story. If you ever travel through West Virginia, it's very eye-opening, and the poverty is akin to what you see in some of our urban areas in America too. So one of the things I think, because we talked about Dr. King this week, his war on poverty and LBJ's war on poverty, you know, that's one of the last things he talked about before Dr. King was murdered. Let me say it like that. Mm-hmm. So just bringing up that conversation around poverty, but also talking about racial issues. I think when people talk about poverty, they leave out the point of race, and that's to the detriment of people, Americans. That's why you have like this discussion on critical race theory. Basically, it's American history, you know, and it's such a hot button topic, but yet, you know, you want to ban certain teaching, and you're banning a whole lesson on the Holocaust, on slavery, on the Revolutionary War, on the Civil War, you know, and people don't get it. They just hear these hot button topics, these hot button words, and then they go for it. But at the same time, you know, we're teaching to the test, number one. We're teaching people to be ignorant and not critical, think critically. Number two, you also have like neglect, and people are angry right now, and layering on top of all the anger of job loss and displacement and misplacement and bad health. You know, you have COVID, and you have Omicron running around, and you still have the Delta variant, and you have a whole slew of unvaccinated people who don't feel like they should be vaccinated and don't feel like they should care about the greater good. You know, so you have all of that. It's just a piling mess. And I read a study by historians, and they're really, really worried about what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And history shows, according to them, that we're in a stage of anarchy in this country now. And I fear that the other side, they're still promoting it even after what happened last year. And we're at a tipping point in America where rights are being taken away, and people are angry, like I said before, and they don't know what to do next except act violently.
Exactly. And I want to put a pin in the statement that you made about COVID, because I want to come back to that, because that is important. But I want to move quickly to the Supreme Court. So in December, you were talking about the case from Mississippi regarding Roe v. Wade. And I want to talk about, where do you see the Supreme Court in 2022, because they got a full docket of cases that are coming before them. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, that they struck down the mandate for large companies to have the COVID vaccine, yet compelled healthcare workers to have it. Can you talk a little bit about that, Shanay?
Well, that's what happens when you vote for a white supremacist in 2016. There are consequences to your actions, or this is what happens when people don't go out to vote. This is what we deal with, where you have ideologues interpreting law, saying that, you know, the government can't protect its people and that people can go run roughshod and infect others, you know, because that's their right to do so, when you know that's basically not what the Constitution says. You know, it's supposed to be about the general health and welfare of the people. And that is really eye-opening. It's scary for a person who's worked in the reproductive justice space. We have, you know, there was all oral arguments in December with the Mississippi abortion ban case, and then what happened with Texas and them keeping their abortion 6-week abortion ban in the books, despite, you know, them having to argue it. And what we're seeing here is an erosion of rights of people. And these laws, to be honest with you, directly impact people of color. They'll talk about women, but it's Black, brown women who are going to be primarily impacted by these decisions. They know that, but they're theocrats on the Supreme Court, and they were groomed, they were trained, they were programmed to make sure that people of color, minorities, their rights aren't protected. Now, I tell people all the time, they come after reproductive rights first, they're going to come after you next. They're going to come after LGBTQIA rights as well, and even African-American rights. You know, and it's scary. We're at a scary point, but this is the result of an election in 2016. It was so polarizing, and people fell for the okie doke. And very few of those people who fell for the okie doke are willing to speak up and say, I was wrong. And that's another thing that I think that's shameful in America. It's like, it's a bad thing to admit you're wrong. It's a weakness to admit you're wrong. I think that kind of narcissism that we've seen in the last administration has basically eaten us to the core, and it's rotting, and it's awful. And I see it all the time with our elected officials, and even in personal relationships, and even in the workplace. So it's detrimental to our society as a whole that we've come to a point where you can't admit that you're wrong because it's weak. You know, you can't care about you can't be your brother's keeper because it's weak. You know, personal liberty and regular individualism is the way to go, even though it only worked for 1% of the population. And again, I'm very concerned about the state of this country. We have an election year this year. For some, there's an expectation that power is going to shift in the Senate and the Congress and the House. For others, they don't believe that because of redistricting. And we have a bunch of statewide races here, including here in Michigan, that are on the docket. And if they don't go the way that folks like me hope, that we are in sincere trouble.
We are. I would absolutely agree with that. We'll all be watching the midterms. I do believe there's going to be a flip. Redistricting, the gerrymandering that we see of the maps across the country in Michigan and Texas have almost eliminated the need for people of color in terms of candidacy that we will see. And I know there was a conversation here in Michigan saying, well, we're hoping that we haven't impacted it the way that people are saying. I'm like, if you're hoping, that's not a good response. You need to go back and look at that. And I know that we're still litigating and there's still talk, but essentially I believe the maps are done. And it is interesting because Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, from what I understand, is stepping down. She is not running. Former state rep Sherry Gay Dagnago is pursuing her seat. And we'll get to see what happens to the 13th and 14th districts. I understand that there are some changes. They are not quite sure exactly on all the details, but it is interesting to see how people will be represented. And, you know, speaking of COVID, we're still in the midst of this pandemic. And you talked about people feeling frustrated and people having distrust and people feeling misplaced. And we've heard it time and time again. Fast food restaurants can't find people to work. Job openings are everywhere. And I keep telling people keep saying, well, that's because the government was paying people money. I said, I think you need to look a little bit deeper. I said, we have a disease that if you are around people, meaning you and I, if we're in the same room, there's a likelihood that one of us will pass it to the other, or we both pass it to each other. And depending on what your health status is, whether you're vaccinated, unvaccinated, I don't want to get into who's vaccinated or not, but it can determine the course of your life. There are people right now who have had the vaccine and have gotten sick. There are people who have not been vaccinated and have died. I'm not making a political statement. I'm just expressing a fact. Where do you see this divide? And do you see this deepening, Shanay? Because one of the things that I noticed, and I just recently drove through West Virginia. West Virginia is a beautiful country, state. It's a beautiful state. The mountains and the hills, it's beautiful. But I saw poverty and I went, wow, it's not just what you see in a book or in a documentary. There's real poverty here and it's different. And I thought, oh, okay, so the conversation about Appalachia in urban areas makes so much more sense to me. However, I noticed, because I was an out-of-towner stopping in and needed to get my Starbucks, so I'm telling on myself, and I stopped to get Starbucks in Charleston, which is the capital. All the workers had on masks, but not one person who walked into the Starbucks. And I was surprised because that was actually, the inside was open. Not one person that walks in had them. And everybody looked at us and I said, ooh, we're in one of those states where they don't prefer to wear masks. And it's interesting because, as you said earlier, we have become deeply politicized, deeply polarized. And COVID just seems to be worsening. Share your thoughts on that?
It's worsening among the unvaccinated. I always go back to the thought of people not wanting to be vaccinated because they think they're genetically superior to other people. And it's a line that you see in white supremacists and in white nationalist circles. They think their genetics will protect them. But yet, you know, there are job openings, like you said. And one of the things that we haven't really talked about as a nation is COVID's long-term effects on our people. And there's like multiple studies that double-digit percentages of people suffer from long-haul COVID effects, whether it's, you know, your lungs, your heart, your hair, people are losing hair, yes, erectile dysfunction, all of those things and more. Kidney organ damage as well. And among the unvaccinated, that, you know, they nobody's talking about. These people can't go to work. They can't work. There are people that can't walk across their bedroom anymore. There are people in my family, person, you know, before the vaccine came out, person that one of my loved ones was on an oxygen tank, just getting off of an oxygen tank. They caught COVID last March, you know, March 2020. So she's still dealing with it. I mean, but people are like, they think that there's genetic, they can outfox this. It doesn't work that way. You're seeing young people now with long haul COVID. You're seeing older people pass away from it, but then you still have a segment of the population that they have long haul COVID. And we're not talking about the economic impact, not just with jobs, but we're talking about the current state of our healthcare system. It's exhausted. Many doctors and nurses are overwhelmed and they're leaving their profession because it's too much. But yet we have we have a segment of society that believes that they genetically, are immune to it, that it doesn't exist, that they don't care if they give it to other people. You're sheep if you wear a mask. Mm-hmm. And there's like no patriotism around us, not being proud to be an American, being proud to be each other's neighbor, no sense of kindness. It's like, I say this a lot, we're a nation of narcissists and psychopaths, sociopaths and psychopaths, that people don't care about consequences, young and old. I've seen it in my own family. Mm-hmm. And I say that, it hurts my heart to say it, but people in my own family are, they think that they're immune to it, that they don't care if they give it to others. They don't care. And they've been taught that, they've been programmed that, they believe in that white supremacist individualism, rugged individualism, I don't care about anybody else but me mentality. They don't believe, they've like, in me being a Black Christian, we're brought up in a collectivist atmosphere where we are responsible for each other. Now, I ain't telling people to go to church, but my values stem from being in the Black church and knowing that I am my brothers and sisters' keeper, that, what happens to me impacts my brother and sister, and I don't, if I'm sick, I don't want my people to be sick. If I'm hurt, I don't want my people to be hurt. But you have like this, it's crazy. And I'm going to say this, and I sound like a old lady, but social media. And,
oh my goodness.
It's tapped into the, like, they find these kids and adults who just have nothing left to live for, and they're so miserable. All they do is they're out there to hurt each other. They think it's cute to hurt each other and to be mean and cruel to each other. Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, people don't like to admit that they're wrong, or take a L, mm-hmm. honestly. And it's just so disheartening for me to see. I went to, last year, I traveled and I see people without masks on. I've had people who come to my home who don't wear masks, outside, and in my house, they wear masks. Mm-hmm. And they were conspiracy theorists. They believed in all this stuff. And one person is a conspiracy theorist, and he's like, he just had COVID and he can't move. This is my roofer. Can't move.
Wow.
Cannot move a lick. White man from the suburbs, can't move a lick. He could barely breathe. He's a husky guy. God bless him. I have a nickname for him I can't say. But we call him a bear because he's like a teddy bear. So I got you. Just say it like that. He's a teddy bear. And even us, we have opposing political views, but we manage to be friends, and we do business with each other. But he believes in the conspiracy theories. My own family members believe in those conspiracy theories. They've caught COVID and then given me COVID, but still believe in the conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. And there are people out there that know how to target people who are vulnerable, mentally, emotionally damaged people. Mm-hmm. who need something to believe in, whether it's their genetic superiority or, they think that they're smarter than everybody else. Like I said, we're in a nation of narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths. Yeah. And we see it every day. And I hate to sound so pessimistic when it comes to human behavior, but what's been demonstrated in the past 2 years just confirms a suspicion that I've already had.
I would 100% agree with you, Shanay. And as a mother of 2 school-aged children, teachers, same thing. We have this whole politicization within the schools. Should the schools be open? Should they not be open? Should kids be at home? Should they not? And, having the opportunity to have your kids at home and being able to stay at home with them is a blessing. But it's also tough, because you are managing your kids all day. There's no break. There's no in between. And so instead of your kid's teacher being there when they have a question, oftentimes it's the parent. So, kudos to all parents who do that. But in the same vein, when those kids go to school, they become petri dishes for everything. And I have said this, The worst bug that my husband and I ever got was when our son was about a year old and he caught his first flu and we thought we were dying. And every parent knows, because you go through a cycle where you get a lot of stuff and you're like, oh, what is this? But it's because your child is passing things to you. That didn't change because COVID came and they were just like, okay, well, everybody's going to wear a mask now. You're not going to pass anything. No, kids still pick up everything, and kids have to be monitored and told to wash their hands, just like some adults. And I'm going to be real honest about that.
Yes.
You know, some people who say they've been washing their hands and doing those things really haven't, and are still spreading it, as you said, because they don't believe it. They believe in the conspiracy theories. But then you have the hospital systems, as you said, where doctors and nurses are quitting because people keep showing up saying, well, I didn't believe this was real, but now I need you to help me. Okay. You didn't believe it was real. Why are you here? What is it that you think that we can do? And I've heard more stories about nurses and doctors having to tell people, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. You should have taken a shot when you had the opportunity. And it is sad because with all the things that we have going on in this country right now, this is one of the few things that we actually can control.
Mm-hmm.
Shanay, thank you again for coming on. Tell us a couple of things that we should keep an eye on for 2022 and how we can find you and how we can follow you on social media.
Well, to look forward to the 2022 election cycle, right now people are testing the waters, seeing if they have support in the community, financial support, or institutional support to run for office. So I would say pay attention to those things, pay attention to the laws that are being passed across the country, pay attention especially to the Supreme Court and what that means for states like mine in Michigan with a 1931 abortion ban that makes it illegal for providers to perform abortions in Michigan. Pay attention to voting rights and civil rights. As you saw in Virginia, the Civil Rights Division was gutted by the governor the first day he came into office, and quote, a ban on quote, critical race theory in all places, Virginia, which basically is the hub for American slavery outside of South Carolina. Just call your congressperson. If you're in West Virginia, call Joe Manchin, connect with the local NAACP chapters there. They're doing work. There are great progressive organizers and organizations on the ground there that are doing the work, that are talking to constituents there. Just pay attention. Now, you can reach me on social media. You can follow me. My name is La Femme Negrita. It's La Femme, all one word, _ Negrita. And that's where you find me.
Thank you, Shanay, for coming on and breaking down our great topic tonight and keeping us informed and updated. And we will see you soon on the Kim B. Davis Show.
Thank you for having me, Kim.
Thank you again for tuning in, guys. You know, you can find me on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok, everywhere. And it's Kimberly Batchelor Davis. Batchelor is spelled BATCHELOR. You can see this show on youtube.com/Kimberly Batchelor Davis. You can hear this show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google. And you can find out more about me as an author at kimbdavis.com. Thank you again. And I look forward to seeing you on our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.